And greetings in the love and light of the one infinite creator. I'm Andrii Presentation, and I'm here with John, Simon, ABC, Steve, and Ivor. And we're going to be starting with a presentation from Simon, and then we're going to have a discussion, and then we may have presentations from Steve, and I may have a few slides to share as well. All right, Simon, did you want to?
Yeah, sure. So,
Okay.
So do you want me to just kick off, or?
Yeah. So you're going to have to reshare the screen. Remember the full
screen. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I'll put this in presentation mode.
Yep.
That's it. Okay, next slide. Okay.
There, it's working.
That's it. All right. Hey, do you want to see the ones beforehand?
Sure.
This is a cool idea. Okay, this is actually what I'm preparing for the Venus Project stuff. So this is the Prometheus Nexus presentation. So you can see this all right, yeah?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
A painting.
So what this is an example of what's happened to us mentally, right? So you're seeing a picture of the Last Supper as it's traditionally shown. And I saw this picture in the cathedral in Bruges in Belgium. Anyway, so it's the Last Supper, the 12 apostles and everything, and they're all male. Right, my main man, Leonardo da Vinci, comes in. He does a version of it, but the figure to his right looks very female. And it's all right, so there's a whole lot of books about this. It's one thing to read about it. It's another thing to see it. So in Finland, in the city of Turku, there's this cathedral. And up the back, where the red dot is this painting.
Okay.
Hang on a sec. It's a girly. And so so it's actually the Last Supper again. But if you often take a young child up that's young enough, old enough to answer the question, but young enough not to be imprinted on what to answer. Is that figure a man or a woman? And they always answer it's a woman. All right. So there's another one in Kuopio, again in Finland, Orthodox Church Museum of Finland, and up the back there's this painting, supposed to be the Last Supper, and next to Christ is another girly. Right. And so this is in the Cathedral of Our Lady in Antwerp. I was there with my wife. Up the back, where the red dot is, there is this painting. Now, underneath the painting is the 12 apostles. And this time to Christ's left, there is a girly.
Yeah.
Right. Now, what was Da Vinci doing here? Right. Now, this is at a time when, was Da Vinci making a valid point, or was he just being the biggest troll in history? Who knows? His very famous painting was describing something that was not accepted by conventional thought at the time. At the time, if you actually said anything like that's heresy. Not only do you get burned at the stake, but anyone you've ever met gets killed. And anyone who expresses any thought of creativity gets disciplined, stabbed, burned at the stake, and the whole bit. Now, for centuries, biblical scholars accepted Da Vinci's work as canon. Right, so they didn't see what was right in front of their own eyes. Instead, they believed what they were told to believe, and they told everyone else, and everyone else did what they were told to believe. Now, what's intriguing is other artists replicated Da Vinci's change, but they also put their own flair of creativity on top of it. Right, and so in what I'm saying in terms of perception and consciousness and everything like that, do we just do as we're told and believe what we're told to believe? And is what we need to see right in front of us? But because we've been told not to see it, we don't.
Right.
And so is this the way we've always been all along, or are we about to break into a new consciousness? I think we're socially evolving, and this is what's happening to us. Anyway, that's actually part of the larger presentation. This is what I meant to show you. Right. So the industrial system has started to, it actually has been trying to correct since 2005. What I've done here is taken the data that the World Bank tracks used to track the health of the industrial system. It's all metal prices for base metals, precious metals, oil, gas, and coal, and all the fertilizer minerals. What I've done is I've indexed the number 100 to the month of December 2001. So that what that does is it overlays the curves on top of each other, but you still have their shape, and it shows periods of relative stability. Anyway, so we had a period of sorry.
I'm just wondering, is this production or is this reserves?
No. This is actually price.
Oh, price. Okay. Mm-hmm.
And it's on a monthly world price indexed to the month. This is what the World Bank puts out. Anyway, so things are relatively stable. That peak back there is the 1979 oil embargo.
Mm-hmm.
And this happened in January 2005.
Wow.
Right, and so that dip there is the GFC. So this happened before the GFC.
What's the GFC?
Global financial crisis of 2008.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the signatures here, the US dollar decoupled from the gold standard in 71. There's the Iranian oil embargo of 79. The global financial crisis of 2008. We then fixed it with quantitative easing, which is still going on. And COVID, the gift that keeps on giving, is the peak at the end here.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Case can be made as a blowout, as a chain reaction that started in the oil industry. Right, so a major economic correction didn't resolve the problems, and the volatility is still there. And the point of this is that all this started 19 years in our past. This is not something that might happen in the future. We're in it. We're in it up to our armpits. So what happened in 2005? Well, here's oil production. Now, see that dip there? So we've got our oil plateaued, production plateaued. Why did it plateau? Well, some muppet started another war in the Middle East, and the second Gulf War in March 2003 took offline 4.6 million barrels a day, and then the Saudis were told, you need to make up the difference. The Saudi Arabians couldn't do that. So this is rig count on the right-hand side. They tried very hard bringing more rigs online to get more oil, but they had a 146% increase in rig count in exchange for a 4.2% decrease in oil over the same time frame. So they're in trouble. They're now sweating their assets. So the whole idea, the Saudi Arabians are about to peak and all that. Yeah, right. 2005 January.
That's when they peaked. In terms of production.
Mm-hmm. In terms of production, yeah. So that's when things rolled over and plateaued for the world. Right. So what happened? This chart is crude oil supply and demand. It's an old chart, but since then they've now added biofuels to it, so supply and demand won't line up. They do that on purpose, so you can't sort of see when they separate. You look at all the charts for supply and demand, but consumption now is total liquids, and total liquids contains all sorts of things. It's very hard to unpack and put together what the supply and demand for crude oil actually is. Anyway, so put that chart up against price, and this is not adjusted for inflation. I haven't got around to doing that, but that point dotted line there is when oil plateaued. And so you got a production plateau that went from January 2005 to October 2009. In that era, supply and demand separated, and that correlated with the price spike. The idea of speculation for price spike to drive everything up. That peak correlates with the start of the global financial crisis, when the system finally broke. Right, okay. And so then we fixed it with quantitative easing. So the global financial crisis, and then fracking, an innovation in horizontal drilling happened, and then fracked oil takes off and saves the day. So the GFC was caused by a had a chain reaction that started in the oil industry. We fixed it by printing money. The problem is still there, and the United States is now the new Saudi Arabia. So now let's go back to this chart. Right, so that blowout is related to a pattern that happened in the oil industry as a consequence of a war that took down a major oil producer. and that put the rest of the system under a hell of a stress. The global financial crisis was, the whole system was put under serious strain. The weak link broke, and the mortgage subprime issue in America was blamed. That's just the weakest link. It's not actually the cause, right? And then the whole system's, and then there breaks, and then we fix it by printing money, but the problem is still there. Nothing's been resolved at all. All right, so that's to show that we are in it. Yeah. So
and just the problem, as you would quantify it, is it the oil, or?
It's what we use oil for. It's not oil directly. It's like saying money's not the problem. It's the love of money is the problem.
So you're saying the love of oil is the problem?
Yes. It's our dependency on oil, the fact that we cannot do without it, and the fact that everything's attached to it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now I've taken global GDP and oil production back to 1965 and indexed them to 1965 equals 100. And so what this does is it overlays the curves. And in the beginning, when we were winning, oil was energy. Energy was work done. Work done was economic value. Economic value was GDP. Okay. In 1971, the US dollar decouples from the gold standard, and the real economy separated from the fiat economy, which meant every time we wanted to spend money on something, we just print more money, and that's how we balance the books. And we've been devaluing what we've been doing ever since. And this is what that chart looks like now. So in the beginning, these two curves overlaid. Mm-hmm. When the fiat currency experiment runs its course, these two curves will be forced back together.
Wow, that would be a huge devaluation.
And yes, that's going to be hilarious. Now, the red line is oil. We'll come back to that later. So this is one of Art Berman's charts. I recommend everyone have a look at Labyrinth Consulting and Art Berman. He does excellent work. Right, so what he's done here is he's plotted per capita energy consumption in terms of kilowatt hours a person versus per capita GDP. Now, over time, we've got several subpopulations here. From about 1800 to the early 1970s, you had one straight line, one relationship, honest accounting between energy and what we call GDP. From the early 1970s to around the early 2000s, we have a different relationship. And that relationship was very different. As in when we decoupled. Yeah?
Well, it looks like flatter, but
yeah,
you're saying it's very different. Could you elaborate on how it was different?
Okay, so the way to interpret these charts is the gradient. When we split up populations, like that one there has one gradient as in one population, one set of rules. And energy and GDP move in a particular correlation. When it's flatter, we have a different gradient. So what that means is per capita GDP doesn't change very much. It changes a little, but not very much at all. But the amount of energy consumed goes through the roof. Right, so the rules between energy and money change. Then we've got sorry.
Yeah. So this is kind of like we also see the wage stagnation, like the real income that people are making has been stagnant basically since they decoupled the dollar from.
And so the point I make here is what happened in the 1971 when the US dollar decoupled from the gold standard, but then forced the rest of the world through the petrodollar agreements to take part in a fiat currency experiment where they can do whatever they want. That's the point when the system fundamentally changed. That change is far more influential than anything since then. Because the difference between, say, 2005 to 2019, that's like the post-global financial crisis, the quantitative easing era.
And the oil fracking era.
And the oil fracking and everything. It's not that different from the early 70s to the 2000s in terms of the relationship between energy and money. This is when reality has fundamentally changed. Right. So the system's been trying to thermodynamically correct since the 1970s, and we won't let it happen.
So we're basically using more energy. So I'm looking at it on the bottom. People can see per capita energy consumption. Energy consumption is continuously going up,
Yep.
but our GDP or our quality of life is staying stagnant.
So GDP is devaluing. It's becoming, it's eroding fast.
Oh,
So
okay.
the same number of people's on the ground, we're using more and more energy all the time, but our ability to store wealth, we've got this is the Red Queen problem. We're having to move further and further and faster in terms of money, just to match reality. And what that means is, what happens when that gradient goes negative? Right. So 1970. So this is the same data as before. All the World Bank tracks. Base metal. This is price, global market price in an index as put out by the World Bank. But this time the pinpoint is January 1970 and the number 100. So it's that little point there. And we see that. So in 1971, the system decouples. And we see unprecedented volatility. Now, if we go back to that chart that we had before, 1971 is in here. So we have unprecedented volatility, but it still happens at a bandwidth. In 2005, things go really nuts. And the volatility is unprecedented again. But the real change happened back here in 1970. There comes a point when the volatility goes so hard and so much that the system just breaks. And that's what this is telling us. This is the heartbeat of the industrial world, the metal price and the energy price. Right, oil, why do we care? So this is primary energy consumption in exajoules. There's in all energy systems together. Oil, gas, coal, renewables, nuclear, and everything else that BP statistics can get hold of, up against world GDP, and this time it's inflation adjusted. The correlation between them is excellent, like 97% correlation. What this means is energy translates to economic wealth. The end. No exceptions. Right, so that's energy. Here is total liquids. Now, total liquids is crude oil plus biofuels, plus a few other products on the side, but it's mostly petroleum products. This is gross domestic product in 2018 versus total liquids consumption in 2018 as a national average. These are all countries. So all the countries that are represented by the United Nations are here. The blue dots are Europe, and the red dots is the rest of the world. So they're the larger European economies. There's the United States. There's the BRICS economies. So correlation of 0.92. What does this mean? More oil consumption translates to more economic wealth. Less oil consumption, less economic wealth. No exceptions. There are no economies that have low energy consumption, low petroleum consumption, and are also rich. We're a petroleum-driven society even now. So these larger economies up here, if energy then decreases in terms of what's available, then all these larger economies will be required to move down this curve. Right. Give war a chance. How often have we seen war happen in a place where there's oil? This chart got me in trouble, but not being terribly bright, I didn't notice.
Oh, how did it get you in trouble?
I wrote a report. This is actually in the oil report of 2019. It went in, it got signed, it went out there. The oil industry was most displeased because they preferred to write the oil reports themselves. Having a government-backed organization put out an outlook on oil, they saw that as, that pissed them off.
Oh, okay.
And because they prefer to keep a few things undercover. They wanted to keep things like the true dated peak oil off the books as long as possible. They didn't want certain things said out loud. And a few comments came in that my management didn't necessarily like. But it's data. So
Yeah.
it's like, anyway, so there's two columns here. On the left, there is a place where a war has happened, a military action or an economic sanction. On the right are the people who engaged in that war. In both cases, everyone's got reserves of oil production, and they consume oil. Now, look at the United States. And the ones that said they're peak oil literate, what that means is the government has commissioned a report on peak oil and then kept it confidential. There was a list of them. There was about 10 or 15. Not 10. It was about 10 reports on what peak oil was. Like the German government wrote a report, the German army, and then they tried to keep it confidential, but it was leaked. Anyway, so the United States, Saudi Arabia, these are all alliance, one big alliance down the right-hand side. Iraq was an ally of the United States until they went to war. But, Canada, European Union, United Kingdom, the entire West. Right, so the countries that are here, there's 10 countries listed here. Now, there are 193 countries in the United Nations. These are just 10, but these 10 collectively represent 78% of global oil reserves. This is in 2019, 64% of oil production, and 48% of oil consumption. A case can be made that the conflicts, military and economic, are seen as a contest of who controls the oil market as the market approaches peak oil. Right, so Cui Bono, who benefits? Right, so that's that chart.
Okay, yeah, the consumers presumably are the ones that benefit.
Sure.
Well, the biggest consumption states, like the United States, they're the ones instigating a lot of these wars.
So it's not that simple. I've come to the conclusion it's not the consumers, it's the people who control the exchange. The people who control the petrodollar exchange are the ones that benefit.
Oh, okay.
Right, and so that's still the West, right? But by the time it gets to the consumers, they've paid the piper.
Right.
So, all right. So this is Total Liquids. This is another one of Art Berman's. So this was like November 2018. We've had a localized peak oil. We think, all right. And according to Total Liquids, it looks like that's COVID, the dip there. It's recovering. We're all good. But when you actually look at it, crude oil is the blue. That peaked and it declined, and it looks like it's not coming back. But we're now forcing more biofuels and more natural gas, liquid-derived gasoline. So the gas industry has been forced to prop up the oil industry to maintain demand. And so what we call peak oil now has to evolve. All right. Here is Gail Tverberg from Our Finite World. She does excellent work. I recommend people look at that. Here is oil production in a monthly context. Peak oil, November 2018. And there's COVID, but we're on a plateau now. It's not going up. So, and remember, in the background, 81%, this was in 2016 from HSBC, so it's probably more now, but 81% of existing oil reserves have been annually depleted at a rate between 5 and 15%. The IEA has now admitted to 8%, but I'm about to show you a reference for the 15%. That's now 5 years in the past. Paraphrase Matt Simmons, the longer that peak is there, the harder it becomes to exceed that peak. So, Discovery, this chart that we've all seen. This is one of John Peach's. John, you do excellent work. You're still up there with the best in the world in this stuff. Saudi Arabia, that we all depended upon, that's that big column there. Nothing else like it in the world. So they're the discoveries. You might notice most of the big discoveries happened in the 60s and the 70s, and the dotted red line is production. So now the red is cumulative discoveries and cumulative production is the blue. Take one from the other and you've got your net inventory gain, peaked in 1985, and since then we've been declining. Now, John's also found that the midpoint for production was 1996. That is, since 1996, half of all oil ever has been produced and consumed. Now, there's a belief. Now, I get hammered by this a lot. It's a free market mechanic. belief that as a resource becomes scarce, the price increases, creating an incentive to innovate substitutes or demand less. So technology will step in and solve the problem. So if this belief was applied to the oil market, what that means is higher oil prices will make previously unviable oil deposits viable and would encourage exploration, and more deposits will be found. Thus, oil demand would regulate oil price and facilitate more resource supply. Right, and this is the classic free market economics. Resources are irrelevant idea.
It's the religion of progress.
Yes. So if this was true, then an increase in oil price would correlate with an increase in oil discovery. So let's look at that. This is oil price back to 1861. Now, this is not inflation corrected. This is in true dollars. There's a massive kick up in around 1971. That's when we decoupled from the oil standard. This is inflation adjusted to $24. And now we're sort of seeing the same thing. It doesn't correlate at all, not even a little. Right, so there's your decoupling. There's your 1973 oil embargo. There's 1979. 2001, financial derivatives were deregulated, and oil derivatives became the most traded commodity in the market. And the oil price spikes. There's your GFC peak, global financial crisis. And there's COVID, the gift that keeps on giving. Please excuse my sarcasm. 1985, the peak of net inventory gain is there. And 1996, the midpoint of global oil production is there. Price doesn't correlate with any of it. I call bullshit on the idea that higher prices magically brings us more physical resources. Okay. A few more slides. So here's one of Art's, Berman's again. He's actually taken what information they have at the time to work out, to do a prediction based on what he thinks will happen in terms of production. The dark orange is crude condensate, that's your crude oil. It peaks in 2018 and never recovers. The natural gas liquid, though, was able to actually increase, and they have a total peak oil of 2027 altogether. So that's like 3 years away. And so, yeah. Then in a few weeks ago, ExxonMobil came out with this, outlook to 2050, and they published this graph, which I thought was very brave of them. So at this point here, we're going to see a sharp drop-off. Now, the dark blue is oil supply with no investment. The red is actually, if they invested in the fields they've already got, they'll get more production, but we still decline. The light blue is the wedge of hope, the stuff they haven't found yet. And you could argue that they're having trouble raising investment and they're trying to scare people into investing. That is actually possible. But for a major oil company to come out and say this stuff out loud is saying peak oil is a thing.
Yeah.
And so this is the so between 2023 and 2030, over those 7 years, we will see a 70% contraction of oil production.
Wow.
Where, given the price response, the permanent loss of 15% of oil supply per year. Ouch.
And this is from Exxon.
This
one
is
of the largest oil companies in the world.
So that's the actual report for people who want it, and so on. It's not the report. It's the executive summary, and you've got to pay money for the report itself. And so far I've been too cheap to actually do that. But what it does, I've got like a number of things that line up in 2025, where we go from talking about this to seeing it when we look out the window, and the conversation will change and the mood will change, and I won't be seen as crazy anymore. This is the map that I've put together to describe what's happening to us. The book, The Fourth Turning, which I found is very useful to every 80 years, there is a conflict in American Western culture. 80 years ago was World War II. 80 years before that was the American Civil War. 80 years before that was the War of Independence. That basic cycle goes all the way back to 1690 or something like that. And within that 80 years, there's 4 generations. And so they split that up. So in 1913 was the formation of the US Federal Reserve, the Bretton Woods Agreement. 1962, global oil reserves peaked. 1971, the US dollar decouples from the gold standard. 1973 was the petrodollar agreement. January 2005 was the blowout that we saw in metal price. And 2008 was the global financial crisis.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're moving into the environment of the last couple of years, which is actually the fourth turning, which started in 2008 as the cycle dictates and finishes around 2030. Right, so we're in the environment where the petrodollar has actually failed, and they're using quantitative easing now to hold the system together. If peak oil really did happen in 2018, then all reserves of fossil fuels will now have to be revalued. But to do that, it's a breach of international contract law. I can see this is actually a conflict between 2 empires. The petrodollar alliance, which is basically the West, run from London and Washington.
Mm-hmm.
And there is the commodities alliance, which is the BRICS economies: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. Why do you think South Africa is in BRICS? Why do you think that is?
I don't know.
They produce gold.
Oh, okay.
This is a currency revaluation.
So commodities. So basically things other than oil. But Russia produces a lot of oil too.
So these are people. These are nation states that produce physical things.
Mm-hmm.
Their power is not based in the financial instruments like derivatives,
mm-hmm.
and they're trying to actually sort of bring about a currency that's actually backed by commodities. And
mm-hmm.
they're trying to get out from under the West petrodollar system, and they're trying to initiate their own parallel system. But if that happens, then the petrodollar system will fall because it's saturated with debt. It's winner take all, and there's nothing left for the loser. So this is Thucydides' trap. Now, Thucydides was a historian that lived through the Peloponnesian War in Greece between Sparta and Athens.
Mm-hmm.
And he picked up on a pattern 18 times in the past. An empire would rise to threaten an incumbent empire. And the incumbent mm-hmm. empire was terrified of what the new empire would do, and they went to war 12 out of 18 times.
Wow.
Right, so Thucydides' trap. Do we have a third world war or not? So in here we've got the Ukraine war, Nord
mm-hmm.
Stream gas pipeline, rejection of Russia from the SWIFT system, economic sanctions, breakdown of contract law, the Syrian war, South China Sea, war in Gaza, cats and dogs living together, 40 years of darkness, all that shit.
Uh-huh.
Right. To me, the war in Ukraine is just the patch of ground we've agreed on to have an arm wrestle over this. The war mm-hmm. is actually economic in nature, and the strategy of the West seems to be to try and make it go kinetic, as in into a shooting war, so we can actually compete. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
I'm a little confused there. What do you mean? I mean, there obviously are people shooting each other and dying right now.
It's a small war, but they want a large war. They want a war so large that everyone in the West can now say, oh, it was that war, which is why our economy has now destroyed ourselves. So we can now initiate a reset system.
The petrodollar alliance wants that.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, I see.
They're trying to replace the US dollar and the fiat currencies with something else. Now, Plan A was the TPP, TTIP, TISA agreements between the corporations of the world and the governments of the world, which was to cut out the BRICS economies. And it didn't work.
Yeah, now BRICS has their alternative currency, and like 100 and something nations have signed up already.
Right. So this is where we're going. Mm-hmm. The Basel III banking accord, which went live in January 2023, recognizes gold and commodities as valid bank reserves. right? A little bit
And-
after that, the war in Ukraine kicks off and actually turns physical. Funny that.
And so who made the Basel III banking accord?
So it's an agreement actually between all nation states. I actually haven't been able to get to the bottom of who actually sort
Is
of
it in the
initiated.
UN?
It's actually came through the Bank of International Settlements, the BIS, but who
okay.
initiated? I think it was the UN.
Mhm.
But you can never get a straight answer out of these things.
Mhm.
The Chinese plan, Made in China 2049, where they want to control everything industrial on planet Earth, and the China Belt and Road Initiative is the physical form of that. And the Western plan of the World Economic Forum of Agenda 21, or which is now Agenda 2030, and the Great Reset and restructure of society, that's their plan. And so by 2030, they think they're going to get this into place. But the Commodities Alliance is now doing their thing, and they've got their own plan. And I think humanity at large is about to be hung out to dry. Last slide. This is actually the scale of what's actually happening to us. So over the years, there's a number of empires. Each empire goes like, is it 100 years? Is it 90? Whatever it is. It's something like 100 to 150 years. Between each empire handover, there is a period of great conflict and usually some kind of military engagement. It really does look like China will be the center of the locus of industrial power in the next cycle. And where we're at the moment, well, peak oil, currency default, COVID-19, IMF, Great Reset, climate change, the Kardashians, all that, it's all in here. So this is Thucydides' trap. Do we go to war or not? Right. So the American system was based on oil. The British Empire was based on coal. And before that, it was who controls trade routes, and that was sail power.
Mm-hmm.
And this era coming in will be minerals.
Okay. Yeah. And China already has 80% of rare earths.
And that's me.
Yeah. Wow. Great. So I want to open it up to questions from the panel. And then I have questions from YouTube.
Just a quick point that I think a lot of people think that there was a great innovation to bring about the fracking era, the last 15 years or so. But actually, the original fracking was done in, I think it was 1948 or 1949. And it was heavily used in Texas and Louisiana in the 1960s. Horizontal drilling was invented in 1989. So really what drove the revolution was the quantitative easing, not so much the technology, although I'm sure there are improvements in technology, but I still think that it was money much more than anything else that drove it.
Money, money, money. It's so funny.
Yeah.
Simon, I had a question. I had a question on one of your charts. It was one of the beginning ones showing the volatility in prices. Could you bring that back up? Because there was one I wanted to ask you about. It is the huge peak. It has the highest, more current peak. I didn't know what asset or commodity that was.
I will send you these slides.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, if you could send them to me, or at least the link to it, then I'll be able to put it in the description for the YouTube video.
This one here?
No, it was the first one that went all the way to What is that commodity or metal that's got the biggest price spike?
Coal.
That's coal.
Dotted black
Australian
line.
Coal. Okay.
Black stuff.
Yeah. Okay. I thought that was fascinating. Yeah. This is the EKG, right?
Yeah.
Of the market right here.
Here's one for you, Steve. This one's for you personally. See that peak in 1979? That's silver, not gold.
Yes.
Gold is down there in the yellow. Silver. They thought gold. When gold peaked in 79, they thought, okay, gold is not the thing. We're going to move to a different commodity, and they thought silver would replace gold. Thus, the speculation peak.
Ah. Mm. So why would have coal been the main thing? Because in 2022, 2021.
This is just in the COVID era. This is in the
Mhm.
COVID era. This is also the era when they put out a whole lot of stuff on renewable energy. Remember in Germany,
Mhm.
they blew up, they shut down all the nuclear power plants and the coal plants, and
Yes.
there was a push to go renewable, and it all failed.
Right.
Everyone went back to coal.
Hmm. Oh, so that's why there's the price spike because they were taking everything offline, but a lot of people were still using it.
So the dotted green line there is gas.
Hmm.
And we did have a price spike, and it was a pretty serious one, but it's nothing like what coal was.
Hmm.
Right.
Yeah, we weren't taking natural gas offline.
So, and then you look at these are the fertilizer. All the fertilizer minerals, all of them are having extreme spikes in the same area. So you've got a spike in 2019, and you've got a spike in 2008. But you've also got a spike back in 1979. Fertilizer.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yep.
Simon, the one chart with Art Berman's chart where he has an estimate or forecast of what he sees the production going to be by 2050 or
2027. Hang on, so let me get to it.
Actually, yeah, keep going. It's the one where
It looks like a gradual decline. Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on this, Simon? I mean,
so Art knows more about oil. He's forgotten more about oil than I'll ever learn. The system has a momentum to it. I actually expected things to have more of a cliff.
Mm.
I expected things because the system as a whole, if the hemoglobin of which is oil-based energy stops even a little bit, then things unravel very quickly.
Yeah, and I agree because I think one of the most misunderstood aspects of the market is all that debt and finance that you showed in the beginning, and when that starts to get into trouble, because I had an interview and someone said, what if they try to balance the budget in the United States, and they could try to do that in other countries? Since 2017, the U.S. government has had 13 trillion in deficits. 13 trillion. Now, a lot of that money went to regular people, whether it was efficiently used or not. And that the GDP grew 10 trillion. Yeah. So if you start balancing the budget, you're going to cut the GDP. And guess what, Simon? You're going to cut the energy too.
That's right.
And so I think when this finance gets into trouble, which I agree, I think that downside of the oil production in the future is going to be a lot steeper than we realize, and it's all due to the masking of the system.
I think what we're going to see is something like the dark blue on this chart, because that system here is when there is no war and everything works and everyone plays nice with each other. This one here, when everyone stops cooperating and everything goes sideways and we are left with what's left. And that downward slope is chaos, and let's have a good old-fashioned bar fight rather than doing things constructively.
I want to also get John Peaches on this, but Ivor has his hand up as well. Ivor, is it related to what we're talking about?
Yeah, I just want to know, this is for both Steve and Simon. Okay, if we say, most of those empires were based on a silver currency, the ducat, all those ones, or maybe some gold, right? All right, and then let's say that the U.S. is the petrodollar, right, and has been for a while. What is China going to use if we go off of a fiat currency? What's China going to use to, what's it going to be that the base the yuan on?
That I don't know. What I do think is the hemoglobin at the moment in the system, like blood hemoglobin, that's oil, right? The way the Chinese are running around like headless chickens on semiconductors has me convinced that is semiconductors the next thing, but that requires a very complex system to be running. I don't know. I do know the Chinese are very serious about thorium nuclear power, And now that they've worked out that AI will consume such a lot of energy and they can't do it with wind and solar, that everyone has collectively said small nuclear reactors are the way to go. And overnight they've decided to become a bit more sensible about things. You know, the bullshit we are fed is extraordinary.
And
now, Ivor, you bring up an excellent point, and that chart. This is an excellent chart you have here, Simon. The one thing the footnote I would add: who controls the trade routes? That is so true. But before coal, as you know, it was wood, and wood has been the foundation of ancient civilizations for 2,000 plus years. And so it was when England figured out how to smelt iron using coal rather than wood. So that gave them a 50-year technological advancement across the rest of the world. Now, the interesting thing is, I've got a little update I want to do on net oil exports, and I see a squeeze coming of net oil exports. So even though you could get a peak and plateau of oil production, as it slowly starts to decline, what may also happen is the net oil exports that are available are going to decline even quicker. And
so
that's...
Does this chart make sense to you? The dark blue on this chart, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, and I told Andrii I was going to do, I did my own presentation on this, and maybe the next time I can show, yes, it does, because in the last several decades, 3 or 4 decades, and I've seen some charts you've had, Simon, in your updates, that we went more to offshore production, and 2/3 of the production now is non-OPEC. And so a lot of this production is offshore. Well, that declines 12-15% a year. That's very high. And then you add shale oil, which declines about 40% a year, and then natural gas liquids, which is about 35% a year. ExxonMobil, I think, took an average of all this, and they came up with 15% a year. And I did the numbers. It's about right. Because we went from super large onshore fields of oil that declined 6%, 5%, 8%. That's the number you hear. It's 8%. No, it isn't. I knew the number was bigger. I thought it was 10%. It turns out to be 15%. I think that's a realistic number. And so, especially when you went from super large onshore fields to offshore and shale oil that declines that quickly. So yeah, I think that chart makes a lot of sense. I don't think it's a marketing way to get more investment. I think, and they say natural gas is 11% a year.
Yeah. Like so, everyone I showed that chart to, they immediately said, yeah, that's not a real thing. Come on, they're just trying to get more money. Come on. So that there's this suspicion. Yeah, they don't believe it.
We have to realize the United States was producing 7 million barrels a day in 2005 of oil, natural gas liquids. 7. Now, when you add everything, even its refining gains and biofuels, it's 22.5 million barrels a day. It's 3 times. So the U.S. is almost a quarter of all the global, petroleum and liquid supply. It's almost a quarter, let's say 23%. And if you stop doing investment there, that can easily fall by 2030 back down to 4 million barrels a day, because that's all the conventional we have, really, unless it's actually less than 4. So yes, in 7 years, you could lose about 15 to 18 million barrels a day just from the United States.
And they're the swing producers. They're the Saudi Arabian replacement.
Right now, yeah.
I'm sending you my slides in PDF form because it's a bit big to email. I'm sending this out to all of you now. So let me just. So
thank you.
So I just wanted to get John Peach's assessment on which of those future oil projections you think are the most realistic of the ones that Simon showed, because you've got a lot of oil and information.
Well, yeah, I think Simon, I think it was slide 41. you actually put some words on it. So not only is there the natural decline, which looks like it's maybe 15%, that's pretty high, but the feedback from that is going to add to it, right? That as the oil production declines, it's going to impact the economy so much that, people are going to be out of work. And so then the demand falls even more. There's less money for any, production improvements. There's, probably nothing left for discovery. So I could see this going, right there.
This one.
Actually, the next one, I think you put the words on it, right?
Actually, they did. That's actually a cut from ExxonMobil. They're ExxonMobil's words.
Oh, wow! Because at the bottom there, where it says unemployment rates will reach 30%, that's a massive disruption.
They're trying to get out ahead of this, like we're in trouble, we know it.
Yeah. Yes, we're all in trouble.
Wow, great. And then I had some questions from YouTube, and then I'm hoping at 1:30 or like on the half hour we'll move on to Steve's presentation, but I just want to finish with this one. And so they were asking, it's in the chat. You can read it if you want. The critical Norway will hit a spot. I don't know. They were wondering how much longer Norway will produce oil with an energy surplus. Oh, okay. I guess someone answered that. That was 2031. And then there's Peter Zeihan. He's always talking about reproduction rates.
Look, this has been confirmed. Sorry for interrupting, but this has been confirmed by several people now. Peter Zeihan is a mouthpiece for the intelligence community in the United States.
Wow. Thanks.
He's a talking point that takes the crib sheet from CIA, NSA, FBI, whatever the American system wants the world to hear. That's his mouth.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thanks. That actually makes a lot of sense, because I was also looking at his presentations and they didn't make any sense. He was always talking about how everyone else is going to be doing poorly, but America will be completely fine. We'll never run out of oil. Where everything is just like so cheery, and so now it makes sense if he's an intelligence asset. Okay, and then someone Rita is asking about Ireland and Iceland energy consumption low, but one of the richest countries in the world. Data chart, please explain.
So, right, okay, I think I know the one you mean. So okay, let me just pull this up. I've actually been working on. Okay, I think they mean this chart here.
Yes.
So,
yeah, where Iceland is there at the bottom there.
So I'm working on the assumption, not the assumption, but I can show you the video if you like of why I think this. But Europe, I think, is going to break up. Europe is going to hit a currency default and fragment and break up. And in the wreckage, there'll be new alliances. And I think the future, or one of the future blocks, could be what we call Nordia, an alliance between industrial clusters across Finland, Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. And that's actually what I've been modeling. So how big is the circular economy? Right. So, and Iceland happens to be the decisively important country. Each one of those countries have something to contribute. For example, Norway's got a little bit of oil left, but they've got a lot of hydro. Iceland has a bog load of geothermal, so much they can make aluminium.
Yeah.
Right. And the reason I'm doing the job in Hawaii is to test the methods outside of the Nordic frontier, but also mirror Iceland. It's an island with geothermal. Now, the reason Iceland's all the way down the bottom there, they are very, very wealthy and rich. The vast majority of their energy has nothing to do with fossil fuels. right? It's all geothermal. There's a little bit of hydro. Now, that chart is total liquids consumption of petroleum products. They're a relatively small population, and because of the weather, they don't drive very far, right? But they are extraordinarily wealthy.
Right. Yeah, I guess this isn't per capita. This is just plain.
No, this is for the nation state. So Iceland, it's got carrying capacity issues because it's dependent on fossil fuels to run. But because of that geothermal capacity, Iceland will be decisive in whether the Nordic frontier block works. So it's yeah.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And so I also had a question about global shipping. Without oil, I guess that would be sail.
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily? Okay.
So Maersk, who actually makes the big shipping containers, they are actually looking at ammonia fuel.
Oh, okay.
Ammonia, and they're actually testing engines. And they've got engines that have been running for 6 months straight to test their maintenance issues. Oh. And the technology is mature. It turns out they'll need more maintenance than your conventional petroleum engines, but it's a technology that's stable. Problem is ammonia at room temperature and pressure happens to be toxic to living things. So if you've got a motor that's not tuned very well, you've got toxic gas coming out the exhaust. So we're not going to see this in a car in a city, but you might see it in a ship, you might see it on an airplane, and you might see it on a freight train going between cities.
I heard it's super. It's actually well. Ivor, I see Ivor shaking his head. I would like to hear what he means by that. But I know they do use ammonia in airplanes, but I heard it's super toxic to aquatic life.
It's
ammonia.
horrible. It's horrible. There are a lot of problems with it, but they're looking at it.
Can I ask, where does the ammonia come from?
They make it out of hydrogen. So where does the hydrogen come from? Now we've got that old chestnut.
Oh yeah, it's natural gas.
And so, well, the problem is the groups that are actually looking at this stuff, they only look at their patch. They don't look at the whole system. All right, and so magically the amount of hydrogen we'll need will appear, and then we will make it into ammonia, and then we'll sail off into the sunset, and we'll all get there.
Okay. Meanwhile, Michelin is working on sails that are they're actually inflatable sails. You know, they're very good at the inflatable stuff. Yeah. And they just pop up and then push a container ship across the ocean for at least, you know, the chunk that you can push on trade winds.
So I saw a concept ship that was electric with a very small battery that had sails. And I think now that I mentioned they were inflatable, but on the sail was a flexible solar panel that would charge the battery, and they would use the battery to get in and out of port. The problem is it was slow. It was much slower than your conventional petrol, diesel fuel beastie. But better than nothing.
Yeah, but let me just say, the Cutty Sark made it across the entire ocean 100 years ago on 20 knots.
Oh, the Cutty Sark.
So, I mean, not the Cutty Sark, excuse me. Yeah, no, it was another one. It was the one of the Clippers.
There we go.
The Cutty Sark. Wow.
Yeah, look at that, so quick. They could get across the ocean pretty quickly, but you have to redesign ships to do that.
Yeah. Our whole industry is based around the idea of speed and throughput, and it's optimized. And our economics is getting increasingly complex to optimize profit in that context. Like, if all of a sudden things were slower, all the economists would slash their wrists. This is not possible. But of course, the market will force things to update.
All right.
Reality will impose itself.
So yeah, I just wanted to kind of round this off so that we could give the floor to Steve, so he could do his presentation.
I'll be quick.
okay.
But you know what I found out? Look, because I've been asked that question. We could bring back manufacturing to the United States because right now, I think the United States is 78% of service economy. And the thing is, when you look back in history and you gauge what's happened in ancient civilizations like the Roman Empire, the Greek Empire, the Bronze Age, it went along a certain trajectory and it had to continue doing that. And you can't stop, move back about 20 years and then become more efficient. No, you continue on that same path until the collapse happens. That's just the way the system works. And so even though there's going to be a lot of ideas put forth to make things more efficient, we're on this trajectory and we can't come back off of it, or you have that collapse. So that's why they have to print or die. You can't stop printing. You started, we're on that trajectory, you can't stop. And so people say, well, these governments are corrupt. Well, if they stop doing that, then the whole thing falls apart. And so this is an unfortunate predicament we're in. But, you had some great slides, and I wanted to share. Let's see.
Yeah, I know Dark Age America also.
If you like my slides, Steve, use them and even make your own version of them, whatever. I'll tell you how I did them.
Okay.
Knock yourself out.
Now, Andre, do I hit the window or entire screen?
Entire screen if you want to do a full screen.
Okay. All right. Okay. Can you see that?
No, we can't see anything.
All right. Let me. So I went to full screen. Let's go back here. In full screen window share. Can you see that?
I'm seeing something. Yes. I see. Yeah, the slides in a window.
We're not in presentation mode yet, but we can see the actual working mode.
Yeah.
Can you see the full screen now?
No,
not
it's
yet.
not.
It's on another screen.
You selected the window.
Okay. Then
so if you want, you could just present through the window.
Oh, I can keep it like this, right?
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so the coming global squeeze of net oil exports, and remember, and Simon, I imagine you saw this. It was Masma Science that put out some great charts. You could go to the website, you put in the country, you put in the region, and you could get you get the production, you get net imports or net exports, and that was the United States. And we could see that Saudi Arabia, even though production was about the same from the 1970s, 80s to 2010, we could see that they were consuming more of their production. So they had less net exports. And unfortunately, Maxima Science stopped updating us about 2015. So what I've done is done a simple, keep it simple, stupid, just to give you an idea of what's changed. This is Middle East oil production versus consumption 2000 to 2023. And so what you see, even though the production has gone from 23.3 million barrels a day in 2000 to 30.4, they've increased 7.1 million barrels a day as of 2023. What's happened over that same period, they've almost doubled their own consumption. So it's now to 9.6. So even though they've increased production, their net exports are lower due to their increase of their consumption. And you can see it right here. If we get a blow up of Middle East oil consumption, it's almost doubled from 5 million barrels a day to 9.6. And what that's done is, even though the Middle East net oil exports have increased, they haven't increased that much. And if we're at that point in time where the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, is getting in a plateau, we've only seen about a 2.4 million barrel a day increase of net exports, even though they've increased 7 million barrels a day. Now, the problem comes about China. You see, China is the largest importer of oil and energy liquids in the world. And what's fascinating, if you go back to 2000, you could see they were producing, about the same as they're producing now, a little bit more, but their their consumption was only 4.6 million barrels a day in 2000. Their consumption grew to 16.6 million barrels a day. So now production it had declined since 2015, but it's even higher than it was in 2000. So if we look at China's net oil imports, this is where it gets interesting, because I think China's in trouble.
Yes, they are.
Because their manufacturing economy, and they're supplying the rest of the world with a lot of goods. We have to, give them credit for that. But they are now, as of 2023, their net imports were 12.4 million barrels a day. And if we add India, it's 17.1 million barrels a day of net imports of China and India. And I mean, you go back to 2000, these two countries their net imports were only about 3 million barrels a day. Now they're 17. Now, there was only one way that could happen. It's due to this country right here. As we could see that the U.S. Consumption kind of peaked about 2005, and then it started to decline. But our consumption is not much lower. It's 18.9 million barrels a day. Go ahead.
Is that because of globalization and offshoring of various industries, or what happened there?
This is a fascinating topic about GDP, right? Supposedly, economic growth is based on oil consumption, right? However, our oil consumption has been relatively flat for 2 decades. But you go around the United States, there's a hell of a lot more strip malls and suburbs and warehouses. Unfortunately, that kind of economic activity will not be sustainable. So that's an entire different subject. But what has changed in the United States is the red area, which is production. And you can see it's actually, the United States became a net oil exporter. Now, it is true that the U.S. is still importing about 6-7 million barrels a day of regular crude oil. That's where the refineries are designed on that. And we're importing about 1 to 2 million barrels a day of products. But we're exporting, get this, 11 million barrels a day of crude oil and products. And so when you look at the net exports, that's what's key. So when you look at the simple numbers.
Simon also has his hand up. I don't know. It might be related to the same slide.
Yeah.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Should I go back?
Yeah.
Well, it's actually China.
Okay.
I didn't want to interrupt your flow because I've been
you want to go back to the China consumption or net import?
Net import.
Okay.
So, for my sins, I've been tracking the Chinese plan. The Chinese have a plan that they are moving to take over, to become the next world empire. And the way that the vector for them to do that is to control all industrialization. And what they did was they developed a strategy. It was actually back in the 70s when this started, but it wasn't until 2002 that they actually said it out loud. And I'm of the opinion that that's the economic plan, and the military plan was in place and developed and hardened before anything was said at all. Right? And so in the early 2000s, the plan came out and the PRC government made recommendations with regard to what the private sector should do in China, and then the private sector in China went off and did it. Where they should put their money, what they should invest in, how they should manage stuff. And it's all like one big gigantic amorphous system that's eating itself inside, but also moving across the planet like locusts. They're moving all over them with all their capital. And in 2002 is when they first sort of started it. The idea was to become the world's industrial superpower by undercutting everyone else, taking everyone else's IP, like industrial espionage, and applying it, and actually do manufacture in ways economically that no one else can compete with. It's not that they've got more resources than anyone else, it's they're using their resources aggressively. The only other country in the world that's doing this is the United States with their oil sector. They're using what they have aggressively. Everyone else is being more resource stewardship. And so what they, in China, they started to absorb, do industrialization, and it was the plan. And they knew this would consume energy. So they've been importing stuff, but in the year 2000 or 2001, 2002, around there's an uptick. And so now they're importing more. But in that plan for China, they know they can't keep doing this. The net import chart that you've got there is nailing this problem. Now, so at some point, they know they need the equivalent of a Saudi Arabia, like the United States controls the Middle East. They can't control things domestically anymore, so they've got to control something else. And so their capital is going across the planet, tying things up. So when the net oil import becomes such a problem and peak oil hits, they're in a position that they can actually do what they need to do. And your chart there basically shows how things are going.
Yeah, anyway. And you make a great point, and there's a chance that China will become the next great empire, but we could talk about this for an hour.
It's what they want. Whether they get it or not remains to be seen.
That's right. And they've added a lot of solar in the last year and a half, especially. And what's interesting, Simon, they stopped reporting their utilization of renewable energy this year because I think it's become a real mess. They've added too much solar too quickly. They've got to shut it down, even their wind, because it's not in the right place. They don't have battery to back it up. And so they added all this because they manufactured it all, and they added it to show that they've added it. And now they're not using their utilization for solar in China is 14%. In the United States, it's 25%. So I think China's got a lot of headwinds, but they're going to try to do exactly what you've said. But they got 1 million EVs just sitting in parking lots due to they're doing a lot of what we would call government kind of sponsored economic activity, like these cities to nowhere, infrastructure to nowhere. And so I think a lot of that, they have to maintain that now, and it's going to take a lot of energy to do that. But you're right; they have developed a lot of relationships to continue getting this oil, because I think when you look at the United States, because this next chart you'll see what allowed China and India to grow was the opposite of what happened to the United States. The United States total net oil imports have declined. I mean, at one point in time, they were 13.6 million barrels a day. Now the United States has become a net exporter. Even though it's temporary, they've become a net exporter. And even though the United States is adding a lot of debt, they've got the energy to back it up, again, temporarily. Now, if we look at this chart, you notice that the ability, even though we brought on shale, the overall mix was that as U.S. net oil imports declined, China and India were allowed to take that up. So that's where that growth came from. And now, is that growth going to continue? And what's interesting, they've been adding a lot of EVs, and they've been adding a lot of LNG trucks, but it's not really offsetting a lot of their gasoline and diesel consumption. Now, this is probably going to decline in 2024, but even with doing more EVs and more electric buses, we could see that according to the 2024 Energy Institute review, that they've consumed the most gasoline and diesel in 2023. So we're not seeing this efficiency. Yes, if you probably, they stopped using the electric buses, trucks, and EVs, there would be more gasoline and diesel consumption. But even the what was this chart? Oh yeah, basically according to Dr. Anas Alaji, they've only cut back about 250,000 barrels a day of demand from their EVs and LNG trucks. And most of the decline is in their slowing economy. So even the EIA is showing Chinese demand is going to continue to increase. So that's basically the issue. The issue is China and India were able to grow due to the shale oil NGL bonanza. And now that that's basically done, it'll maybe go up a little bit more. But I don't see where they're going to get that growth to continue the growth.
Yeah, well, yeah.
Interesting.
I don't know.
I didn't have a chance to see that EIA graph that you put.
Oh, here, let me just share.
We're getting some background noise from Simon. But,
okay. Oh, are you?
Okay.
Yeah, now, I don't know why. It was just some static from your end.
The EIA figures are a little bit different than the 2024 statistical review. As Simon knows, the data is different everywhere you look.
It's
but
dodgy.
You'll notice, even according to the IEA, they're showing China's diesel consumption to continue to increase until 2025, even though gasoline demand is forecasted to decline. Again, I don't know if these figures are going to happen, but India is also continuing to increase. And again, they've been able to do that due to the massive decline in U.S. net oil imports. So I think that needs to be really understood. And I don't think it is by the market.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Right. Well, Simon, I don't know if you could unplug and replug into your microphone. Maybe that'll fix the issue.
I don't have a microphone.
Oh, you don't have a microphone?
No.
Oh, okay.
Hang on, let me plug in my microphone. That'll do it.
Okay, maybe that'll help. Yeah. But otherwise, does anyone have any questions about Steve's presentation? Ivor?
Good work, Steve.
Well, if we do go down by 15% a year, who's going to grab what oil is left? I mean, that's kind of scary, really. I mean, I don't see how, it's going to be, what is it they call it, the best horse in the glue factory or something, or
well, I do believe we're going to see, let's call it the net oil export war competition. But that 15%, Ivor, that's the natural decline rate with no investment. They're going to continue investing. And what happens is that's going to keep the production slightly going up in a plateau. So all that investment is the Red Queen syndrome. It's just going to keep it. Now, we may grow a bit at the best case scenario. We're going to grow, but with these huge decline rates, it's going to become more and more difficult, especially with all the debt we have. So I think after 2025, I think Art Berman's suggesting 27 with natural gas liquids, because I just looked today, the EIA, the United States, produced a record 7.09 million barrels a day of natural gas liquids. I mean, it was like 6.8, 6.9. Now it's 7 million barrels a day of natural gas liquids. That's going to continue. So I don't think we're going to start to get into trouble with oil unless there's another pandemic or something very big happens. I think we're going to continue moving up a bit, but it's going to be after 2025, 26. When these declines start happening slowly, and then they'll probably pick up speed by 2030.
Yeah. Oh, so you think that we'll start to see the production declines in 2030, or?
Well, you see, the one thing that Art Berman, a lot of analysts, oil analysts, don't consider is this debt, right? We need to continue adding a lot more debt to sustain this. And so if that doesn't happen, like if some politician wants to balance the budget and cut Medicare, Medicaid, income security. They want to cut all that. Well, they're going to kill the economy. And then they're going to kill the availability to bring on more oil. And so I think that's the issue. I think by 2025, 26, it could even be 27. After that, I think the declines are going to start kicking in. But it won't be until 2030 that the declines really start to kick in. That's what I think. And this could become much worse if we have another pandemic. We have some major financial problems where a lot of the debt gets into trouble. That could speed it up quicker. So there's a lot of different moving parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, those are all good points. Here we lost Simon.
Yeah, I think he went to fix his microphone.
Yeah, and then there were some other issues. But okay, hopefully he'll find his way back. Now I'm seeing. Okay, so question from the audience. Here, I will copy them over to the chat. And oh, there we go. So does the oil market getting tighter have an effect on microchips? That is very energy intensive industries. Second is AI boom, which also requires equipment. Yep.
Yes, the reason why a lot of focus is on technology, Microsoft, Apple, Google, NVIDIA, AI, is because we have to realize high tech is the biggest consumer of energy. When you start looking and going down the entire supply chain, the more technology, the more complex semiconductors, they just consume an obnoxious amount of energy throughout the entire supply chain. So when you start to get into trouble with energy, then it's going to impact the ability to continue the supply chains. Because, like Taiwan Semiconductor, if you've seen some of these massive fab plants, they're building new ones in the United States. When these things are built, they're massive. As a matter of fact, right next to a semiconductor plant is a specialized gas facility. There are different gases that have to be refined to 0.999. Very expensive. The piping, it's unbelievable. All that is a supply chain that goes 2,500 miles. It includes Europe. It includes the Asia. It includes the United States. All that supply chain has to continue functioning to allow, I call it a 2,500 mile head of the semiconductor snake. And so even though that thing's open, pumping out semiconductors, if one or two components cannot be replaced in this fab plant, then it can't work. And you see, this is the problem with moving to high complicated systems. If you don't get the parts, like when during the pandemic shutdown, Ford had all these trucks that had put in massive parking lots because it didn't have the parts to finish them. Well,
oh yeah,
you can't do that with semiconductors. It's an ongoing process. So I do think as energy gets into trouble, the biggest problems are going to be shown in high tech, because lastly, this idea that the wealthy are going to control all the high tech. No, when the energy starts to decline, the high tech infrastructure is going to break down. And it's going to be very difficult to manufacture a lot of these high-tech things, because you need the rare earth minerals, you need all this massive infrastructure to keep that fab plant running. And I don't think people realize that that's going to be a major issue.
Mm-hmm. I know just recently there was the Hurricane Helene, and it affected North Carolina. And North Carolina has the spruce pine mine with the ultra high quality sand that is used in all microchips, and is the only mine in the world. So I think that in the future we may be also seeing a transition away from pure silicon, just because, like you were saying, the supply chain is so long that we simply can't sustain it. and that we'll have to move on to like silicon carbide. You still need those high purity gases, like you were saying, but it's at least you don't need to go to one mine in the world.
Right.
Mm-hmm. So I had a few slides here I could share as well.
Sure.
And here, there's just some of the ones, some ones from before, and some that I made this month. Just trying to find the right one here. Okay. Here, are you seeing that?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, here's the oil reserves. Now this is assuming that we do not have a decline of production. This is assuming that we just continue producing at the trend that we have been producing. So this is kind of like a yearly graph that I update based on the trend. So John Peach was saying before that in university he's taught never to do any projections because you never know where it's going to lead. But also, like how I think about it is that as human beings, we're not really good at understanding exponentials, and so it's good to have at least an idea of where it's going. And so for instance, here, the degree 3 is assuming the production is a little bit faster than we're currently doing. And the degree 2 is assuming that it's going a little bit slower. Now, this is consistent with earlier predictions, but yeah, as you can see, they have a longer tail here, like the Hallock et al. And this is the 2035 point. And so that would be having the same production as 1965 levels, but with a population that's much, much higher. And then so this is the food security one. And I've looked into, there's also climate change has, this is the limits to growth one. So heat-related deaths. So right now, global averages is we were at, I guess, 250,000 global heat deaths in closer to the year 2005 or something. But now we were at, like, this year, it was 495,000 heat deaths. So this is people who are expiring because it's too hot and then they die. Like one example, I know there was a British man. He was a professor from the UK, and he went on vacation to Greece in the summer, and then he just he got lost while he was outside, and by the time they found him, he was dead.
Wow.
Yeah. So this is a projection of those kinds of deaths, because I think, if I understand correctly, those would be some of the main kinds of deaths that we would see from at least global warming related reasons. And it seems like they're projecting somewhere between 3 to 5 million deaths by 2050 if trends continue. Now that is, a big if, because, say, for instance, if we have a reduction in oil production, then a lot of these people who live in places where they need air conditioning, some people won't be able to afford the air conditioning.
Right.
And and right now, based on estimates, we have between 200 million to 900 million people living in areas that will be uninhabitable by the end of the century without some kind of air conditioning. So we may see this go up to, tens of millions of deaths if we run out of oil, for example, until those places are depopulated or they move over to, like, passive cooling. Now, hunger-related deaths are actually more prominent. We are annually so this if you were to look behind this, this has been declining for most of the Industrial Revolution, and it's only now reaching a point where so in 2014 it reached the lowest number of hunger deaths, which was close to 9 million, or 8 point something. And now we're back. We're actually higher than we were in 2000. It was like 9.8 million hunger deaths, because I found that this was a more useful metric than the number of people in hunger, because the number of people in hunger is a more subjective thing. And the FAO is claiming that we've kind of plateaued on that, and that there was no increase in 2022 and 2023, even though there were sharp increases in like the developed nations. Because, for instance, like in Australia, people who are unvaccinated weren't allowed to have a job, and so they couldn't have food, and so they had food insecurity. But this just wasn't tracked because they only track developing nations. But deaths from hunger is more reliable in that sense. And then again, this is if trends continue, then we could see it possibly going to 30 to 35 million annual hunger deaths. And this is just considering that we haven't actually yet reached production declines. This is assuming production stays steady for this whole time, even though we don't have reserves to go past 2040 if we were to do that. So it's a bit silly that way. But the point here is that hunger is a bigger issue than heat.
Yeah.
Because we've only it's like 1/5 as many deaths.
Yeah.
Or it's actually 20 times more right now.
Yes.
Yeah. And so it's good to keep in mind. And then also agricultural access is also a good metric to see what will happen after fossil fuels ends. How will we manage with the, and so these are the countries, and then based on the number, so the yellow is people employed in agriculture, the orange is living in rural areas, and then the blue is with access to agricultural land. And as you can see, like some of the developing nations like Burkina Faso and Uganda, they didn't really urbanize, and so there's have a very high percentage of people who have access to agricultural land. And so if we were to end fossil fuels tomorrow, then probably 80% of them will still be able to, like in Burkina Faso, will still be able to go on pretty much unhindered. And then India is also pretty good there. And then China and Russia are surprisingly also very high, even though China has a fairly significant urban population. And in Russia, here you've got only 25% of people living in rural areas, but 45% of people, only 6% are employed in agriculture, but 45% of people have access to agricultural land. And this is actually because in the Soviet Union, they had a very good land distribution policy. But if you look at the developed nations like the United States, there's only 2% of people have access, and then 3% in Canada and only 1% in the UK. And so this is going to be very, very difficult for us to have many people survive, especially if the production decline is a rapid Seneca cliff. Because it takes 5 years to learn how to grow your own food. Like if the production was to end today and we wouldn't have food, like say next year even, then most people would perish because they don't know how to grow food, even if they were given land. So, hopefully we'll have a slower decline, some production declines that will put enough stress on the system that our politicians and our populations will realize the necessity to go over to, regular, to back to growing their own food.
No, those are great charts. I totally agree, and you could tell the advanced civilizations, advanced societies like the United States and the UK, it's not smart that only 1 to 2% of the population is doing farming, but that's the way it is. And so now, if you would take that number, look at the Amish, what is it, like 99% of the Amish are farming? So
yeah,
but yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. Here, Milo, did you want to say your question there? The numbers for So Milo's asking about the numbers for Finland, Sweden, Norway, Estonia. I didn't look up for those particular nations, but I would have to assume it's much like much of the rest of the EU. I don't know if I had included Germany, and Germany is 1% of people have access to agricultural land. So I don't know if the situation is much different in the other places in the EU. Most of the OECD countries, I think, are at a very low percentage because they've been industrialized for so long. And basically, I've looked into the history of it, and how it happened was that there were the enclosure agreements. Have you heard of them? Yeah, Ivor has. So in the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the UK began by they started spinning wool in the factories, and so when they needed more wool for these factories, like the wool was a very profitable thing, and that people spinning them at home wasn't very good, and so the rich people wanted more land, but all the land in the UK was taken by various peasant farmers that were living there. And so they pressured the parliament to create a series of what were called enclosure acts, where they would enclose a piece of land and then force all the peasants off of it so that they could put sheep there. And then they also they had a large homelessness crisis where people were walking around and they didn't have a place to live, and then they were like stealing stuff, and then so they made it illegal to be homeless or vagrants, and so they would like punish and kill anyone who was a vagrant, even though they had forced them off their land, and so everyone had to go and work in the factories, in the wage slave factories. And that was kind of the process of urbanization, and that's how it's managed to get to this point where in the UK it is now just 1% of people have access to actual land. Okay, Milo?
Thank you, Andrii, for sharing that. I will speak because it's much easier to do so than write.
Yeah, go ahead.
I have no idea about the land distribution system in England, and I'm not going to pretend to know any otherwise. However, I've seen some information that the aristocrats own a lot of land. I think it was up to 30%. However, I'm not sure if it's then urbanized or if it's available for agricultural production. So that might tip the scales a bit as panic then ensues. That's all. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, if you look at this chart, I mean, you could infer that if you only have 1% of the people with access to agricultural land, that's the 1% that owns the agricultural land. So you have 1% of people owning 99% of the agricultural land in the United Kingdom. Same in Germany, and very similar in France, and 2% of people in the United States. And so I don't know if Simon is coming back. That's unfortunate. I didn't mean to kick him out or anything. I just know he had some IT issues there. Okay, so let's see. There are some more questions. Okay, the floods that can cancel out agricultural land for years. That's true. And how long until the public would know, and how long until it would be told to the public that we have reached the end? Does anyone have any? Steve,
I don't think they'll ever know. I don't think they'll ever know. I think they're going to keep that kind of quiet. And I was thinking the other day, I was wondering, why are we so hepped up about AI? Why do we really want this AI? And I was thinking, it's not artificial intelligence, it's artificial reality. Because you have to kind of present a reality to people that has nothing to do with what's actually going on. And even if you have to use, the rest of the energy to do it. That's my opinion.
And they want to reopen 2 nuclear power plants to run data centers and AI. So It's not really for the American people. It's more for the AI. And I think the control of AI is going to be very interesting. I don't know how far it goes. I think AI gets into trouble in the future, but the control of the information and what you can get out of AI, I think that's also going to be in the government and corporate. They want to control that for certain reasons. And so, yeah, crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, AI is a pretty fascinating thing here. So one of the questions was about cold deaths, and so I am just asking AI right now to do a web search and then to generate the graphs, and then cold-related deaths in millions, and it looks like they're on the decline. There we go, and here's cold-related deaths over the last decade. See, so it went from 55.1 million to 4.4 million. So cold deaths are declining, and it's because our winters are getting warmer. So
yeah, that's the upside. That's the upside to global warming. Yeah.
But we're increasing heat deaths, and the thing is that I think that cold deaths are much easier to prevent. You just get warmer clothing, warmer sleeping bags.
You can't do it with heat.
Yeah, you can't do it with heat. You can't get a better sleeping bag. You just have to leave. Or there's also those wind towers, but I think even probably they have limits. And even if you manage to do passive air conditioning, if it's so hot outside that a human will die within 6 hours, then that doesn't bode well for your plants. You probably won't be able to grow food either. So it's kind of a pointless, if you will, to be there. Okay. So did we have anything else we wanted to discuss or talk about?
And unfortunately, Andrii, I have a meeting at the bottom of the hour. So
okay.
I really appreciate, you sharing the slides, Simon's, everyone's input. It's always good to share this information updated, because I don't think a lot of people realize, just like he said, that was a very interesting start of the presentation with the Last Supper. I had no idea. I didn't realize that in certain Last Supper in Da Vinci's, it was a woman. If that's the case, and then you see these different women in Sweden, it's like it's right there in front of us, but we just don't see it. I think that is like the biggest aha moment. Carbonaro effect.
Yeah, I think that this may be related to the fact that at the time, are you familiar with King James, in the King James version of the Bible?
Yes.
Yeah, and so did you know that King James was a flagrant homosexual, a flamboyant homosexual?
I did not know that.
Yes, he was a flamboyant homosexual, and he was under the impression that he would publicly tell anybody that Jesus was also a homosexual, and he believed that he was a homosexual with John, which was his main apostle there. John the Apostle, not John the Baptist, and which was his most loved disciple. And so I believe that Da Vinci probably made John look effeminate.
Look female.
Yes.
Feminine. Gotcha. Makes sense.
Yeah. But otherwise, we don't have actually any evidence of this. I just want to say, from what we know, Jesus was completely celibate.
And that was 1611, was around the time the British Empire got started. And their first colony, believe it or not, was Jamestown. Their first major colony.
Yeah,
so,
right. Jamestown, right.
That was about the time they hit the New World and really decided to hang on to it. So,
and do you know why they needed to hit the New World? They needed those damn long trees. You see, the big issue with Europe, even though the caprice wood, you could cut wood down, let it grow, and you could use that to make charcoal. It takes too long to make long trees to have masts for ships. And that's what they needed. So the northeast of the United States was a big deal for England because of the math. They could get the long trees that were excellent. And you should see the ships. They had certain ships built just to haul New York, upper, let's say northeastern tall timber back to England. It's just amazing. It really is. People have no clue how important wood was. So important.
Yeah, that was like the strategic resource, like oil or something now.
Right. It is. Yeah.
The King's
Bingo.
Pine, they had the King's Pine in Maine where they would mark it with a mark, and if you cut it, you get in trouble. So that's why before a certain time, I think, the Revolution, you never saw wide pine floors. They'd cut them thinner.
Yeah, and that goes back to this, the fable of Gilgamesh. Same thing. Don't cut those the cedars in Lebanon. That was 2,500, maybe 3,000 years before. Same thing. We just never learned. We continue to do the same thing.
No.
So I just have an update here. So the King James Version was finished in 1611, but the Da Vinci Last Supper was made in 1495 and completed in 1498. But I actually read a book about Da Vinci, and it seems that he was a homosexual as well. So he may have had a similar interpretation of the Bible. Milo, you have your hand up? Go ahead.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Splendid. Pardon. On this notion that we've had information of the environment and how we affect it, I made a short list today thinking about the same problem after reading a bit of ecology. And yes, we have the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is 5,000 years ago, plus minus.
5,000.
And then we have the Sanskrit from India, which is 1,500 BC. Then we have Heraclitus from the ancient Greeks, 450 BC. Then we have Plato. Then we have systemism in the form of Aristotle thinking about the whole instead of separate parts. Then we have many other, Seneca Cliff from just before time started. Then we have the Swedish von Linne in the 1700s making studies, and then we have Malthus in the end of the 1700s, thermodynamics at 1800s, 24, Jevons paradox, 1865, Origins of Species by Darwin, 1859. The term ecology is coined by a person named Haeckel in 1866. Bioeconosis, 1877, by a person named Mobius. And then we have many other these sort of things that are linked upon. And then we have more recent and maybe concerning matters, such as Overshoot by William Catton in the 80s, Collapse of Complex Societies by Joseph Tainter, 88, A Forest Journey that you've mentioned before by Perlin, 89, and William Rees providing Ecological Footprint in the 1990s. So all these different sorts of information that have been available since, well, again, thousands of years ago, we've simply just made it more elaborate, and we're simply ignoring it outstandingly, which is
excellent list.
That's all. Thank you.
Don't forget limits to growth.
It's there too. I just yes, there's many more.
Good.
I just didn't want to have a long monologue, which would last forever.
Yeah. I made a timeline here of wood reserves. Here. And so basically prehistory, humans begin using wood, and then large-scale deforestation begins as humans shift to agriculture. This is 10,000 BC. This is also the beginning of the Holocene. And then 2,500 BC, Egyptians start using it for ships, especially cedars from Lebanon. And then 500 to 1,500 BC, European forests are heavily harvested for fuel. And this was basically the Roman era and the ancient Greeks and the Roman era, all the way to the medieval ages. And then 1600s, England faces wood shortage due to extensive use of shipbuilding. And then Russian forests become increasingly important, and in the 1600s. and then the colonial expansion to the Americas, like Steve was mentioning, in order to use Americas, Africa, and Asia, led to the exploitation of vast new forests. And this was the age of discovery, right? So they ran out of their own wood, and they're like, where else can we go? We're going everywhere else. And so they started the age of discovery to get more wood. And then deforestation accelerated in the 18th century here. Tropical hardwoods from India and Southeast Asia. Oh, okay, Steve, you gotta go. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. Yeah, we're almost done here.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Steve.
And yeah, so 19th century was the U.S. and the Brazil, and then there's only in the 20th century did we even start to think about conservation measures. And then large-scale reforestation efforts in China, Africa, and India. And so far, that's the only ones. Everyone else is still in deforestation mode. Okay. All right, so I'll check if there's any last questions on the YouTube. And petrodollar doesn't work anymore. And recommendations, Forest Journey. Yeah. Okay, 6,000 Years History of Solar by the same author. Okay. All right. Any last comments from anybody before we close the meeting?
Just great chat.
Great chat. Okay. All right. So as we found you, we leave you in the love and in the light of the one infinite creator. Go forth therefore rejoicing in the power and the peace of the one infinite creator, the divine within you. Amen. All right. I ended the stream.